There are several details here that we could pass over without noticing. One is the fact that the Pharisees are colluding with the Herodians, which would not normally be the case. The Herodians were those Jews who were willing to go along with what was happening politically, because Herod was a puppet king, but he was in a way working for the wrong side. Also, we have the way in which psychologically this is perfect and corresponds exactly to what would have happened. They start with flattery, and then this dig, tell us what your opinion is. And they think they've got him, because whatever way he answers, he's going to be a loser. But he uses the opportunity to show actually the real question, and that question applies to us. We know, by the way, why this was a problem for them. There was here the image of a pagan emperor. It was a problem for them. And it so what was a problem that they couldn't use these coins in the temple, and that's why they had the whole system of money changers. They had to have the temple coins with nothing pagan on them. So here there is, as it were, a little bit of paganism that they're going to tolerate if they use this money. We have that curious case in another scene in the Gospel where the temple tax is actually, the half shekel tax comes up, and the Lord sorts that one out by telling Simon Peter to go and get the first fish that he finds and open its mouth, and he finds a complete coin. There's enough there for the two of them to pay it. But here there's an opportunity to make a teaching which actually is far more relevant than we can think, because Caesar worship is just about to come in. We know that even actually within the Roman situation itself it was a problem, and we had the famous Stoic resistance to all this. We had famous cases, those who didn't want it, and the famous assassination of Caesar, when he said, as he saw his own adopted son Brutus coming, "Tu quoque Brute, you too Brutus," with the dagger to kill him. These were becoming powerful eventual emperors, and those in the resistance saw it. We have the case, for instance, of Arria and her husband Paetus, the resistance against this new emperor thing coming in. She took a dagger, plunged it in her bosom, took it out and handed it to him, saying, "Pete non dolet," Paetus, it doesn't hurt, and invited him to commit suicide as well. So even therefore within the Romans there was a resistance, and of course it was going to happen. Very soon it happens. Starts with Augustus, the very name Augustus signifies to us the one who is august, who is majestic, and on it goes, and it gets worse and worse and worse as time goes on, until the Christians have to have then this obligation of burning incense to the image of Caesar, and say Caesar is Lord. And they won't. It's the litmus test. The one thing they will not do, remembering this teaching of the Lord. What is God? Is God, and what is man, and the rights of the same follow. And indeed it gives us also that extra understanding of the very word that Thomas said at the resurrection when he recognized him. My Lord and my God. And we in Ireland can still use that at the elevation, at the acclamation, an ancient tradition which was in popular devotion and which has been put in liturgy. But it applies to us too. We, if we're not careful, can enthrone another form of Caesar. First of all, there is the situation that we're in right now in Ireland, and probably in Europe and further afield, where one somehow has the intuition that sinister forces are getting leverage from the pandemic so as to withdraw the rights of God. It is a constitutional right to worship, and this is seen as just an extra luxury in society, less important than other things which are questionable. But also one sees how there is not an awful lot of pushback, and one sees how to get to this point with universal acceptance it must mean that there's a massive machinery in place to make it possible. The media are colluding to create fear, and one asks how so many laws against the law of God, precisely the law of God, not man, get through the Parliament, the Dáil. It must mean that there are sinister forces which are actually at the highest places. And that would make sense, given the way that, for instance, Freemasonry works. They promote each other. And we know that from the beginning this movement has been precisely one that disenthrones the High King and enthrones another force. Do you know that in the beginning of the 1900s, when they were doing the very same in France, sending out the religious, expulsing them and all this, a priest got permission in some way to get inside to see what was going on. He had a friend, and they went to, I think it was the Grand Orient in Paris, one of the major lodges, when this was all happening, and his friend whispered in his ear, said, "Wish, it's him." And it meant that the one appearing there before them was Lucifer. And he was telling them the next step, how to go about it, which explains how it was so successful. Well, we need to have a certain amount of, as we would say, cop on, to realize that probably there's something not that dissimilar going on, that there's something hugely orchestrated and very well oiled, a machinery that is working underground, precisely that Christ may no longer reign, but a different form of Caesar. But closer to us, in our pocket actually, we might have another form of making sure that Christ does not reign. It's the whole plethora of drainage of time and energy in such a way that we're not free to adore and think, to enthrone Christ in our heart and mind. And that is far more subtle because not quite so visible. It's just there and it gets worse, like the other, bit by bit, unless we make a conscious resistance. Some years ago, I was celebrating Holy Mass for some lovely young travelling people somewhere in the Dublin area in their house, and it was the beginning of Lent. And one of the young lassies there said that her cousin had, for Lent, gone off WhatsApp. And that had been 3 years previously. And this is the interesting bit, after that Lent, she had not gone back on it because, and I quote, she had got her family back. Now, this new way of sending stuff around needs to be looked at, because it's also something that is encroaching on the rights of our King over our time, our mind, and our heart. We can't, humanly speaking, do it. We can't be thinking about two things at the same time. So if we enthrone all this stuff, usually of fairly relative value, where we could perhaps engage with Christ in thought and love and word inside and not outside, we might actually have a different life. It's to be looked at. And one last thing, not going that far, but in general, asking ourselves, who reigns? We are now at the beginning of another gift of 24 hours. It's not yet dawn. Where will it go on this the Lord's day? Now remember, Our Lady appeared as a peasant woman with a coronet at La Salette in the 1800s, weeping on behalf of her son for two specific things. The Lord had asked for 1 day out of 7 for himself, and men will not give it. And also, they could not work without using his name. The rights of God. And it applies also to Christians. The fact that a shop might be open on a Sunday doesn't mean we have to use it. Program our time well and get the things done on another day when it's not working for the wrong side. We can do the same act and lose merit. And, again, in the same vein, remember, one more easily engages with the beloved, this applies also on the human level, with fewer words and more peace. Words obstruct intimacy. So, before this day comes, let us choose, where will it go? Do I want peace in this day and engagement, or do I want more of the same noisy thing.